Hello everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about this idea of the learning panorama, and I want to try and illustrate both the opportunity and the problem of the learning panorama, this vast array of learning that's now available to us as consumers. And in case you thought that I wasn't going to try and sell you something in this talk, there will be a demonstration of a product which we've developed to navigate this problem. But I want to start with something a bit different to that, because I don't think there's enough kind of real-world learning analogies or real-world tasks that get used. So when I'm not talking about online learning in some way, I study Irish literature. And what's on screen now is a text which I recently translated for a publication. And the text is, it'll be hard for people to appreciate this, but it's not only written in Irish, Gaelic Irish, a difficult language. It's also written in medieval Gaelic Irish, and it's also an imitation of a very strange writer called James Joyce, who wrote a book called Finnegan's Wake, which means it's mixed up with Latin and all these other languages and Greek and stuff like that. It's very quite difficult job. So how do I go about, how do I achieve this goal? I need to translate this thing. Obviously, I need to do some learning. I didn't really speak much Irish at all before I started. And it kind of made me think that to do something like this, you can never find one source. You know, I've got to accomplish a task which involves taking in a lot of information, absorbing that and processing it and applying it in a particular context. And I had to use a mixture of 3 different methods. I used Duolingo, which people know is a great kind of personalised learning tool. I had to attend a real-life classes at the London Irish Centre, where the Irish government heavily subsidises classes in their native tongue. And I had to use an online dictionary. And like any blended learning solution, these 2 things didn't work together, you know, in a particularly linear way. It was a question of optimizing in different directions. So, for example, when I turned up at my first face-to-face Irish class, all that learning that I thought I'd done via Duolingo suddenly disappeared. And I had to actually speak, and it was just all gone. Nothing there. And it was very embarrassing because I started on the Beyond Beginners course rather than the Beginners course. And gradually the blend started to work, and it all started to work together. Now, in none of these things, and in really none of these areas, you know, what role did those great founts of consumer learning we talk about a lot, Wikipedia, Google, YouTube, play? Not really very much. This is quite a specialized task. You know, there aren't TED Talks about medieval Irish. There aren't YouTube videos about it. You know, it's about finding this information. And unfortunately, this is a simplification. So these are all the online resources that I actually had to use to translate this text to accomplish this task. I also had to consult a load of books, and I actually had to talk to real-world, real-life people as well and ask them to help me. And you might be wondering, you know, is this really so different? You know, you described something very, very difficult here, translating this text from medieval Irish. That's not what one of my project managers has to do. That's not what they have to do. But I really want to get you to think about, really, is that really the case? Because when we're asking someone to solve a particular problem, to learn a new skill, to do something in a particular context, we are asking them to basically undertake an optimization exercise. All of this stuff, they need to find the right resources, the right list that will help them accomplish that task. And whereas the first example, the first thing I showed you with just Duolingo, the classroom, and the online dictionary, now that looked like a blend that we could easily achieve in a corporate environment. E-learning is the Duolingo, face-to-face is the Irish classes, and then resources, the online dictionary, fair enough. But the fact that I actually had to use all of this stuff, that's a lot harder in a corporate environment. And I would suggest that that's kind of where things are starting to go wrong a little bit with our blended learning or e-learning programs. The world is an increasingly complicated and difficult place. The resources are increasingly dispersed in these different areas, and we stick to this kind of blended format, but really the total amount of content in there is quite low, and it's certainly not very personalized. So optimization problems become easier with recommendations. So just to explain and to kind of put this in a bit of context, so what filter do is provide or develop algorithms that help learning, and one of the use cases for an algorithm is recommendations. You have recommendations because we have people and we have things. There's lots and lots of things, there might be, 130 million books, 1 billion songs, 7 billion people, trillions of tweets. And sometimes we're able to make these decisions quite well ourselves. We know exactly what book we want. We know exactly what resource that we want to use. But sometimes these things are a lot harder to do. Sometimes we don't really know what we're looking for, and these companies come up and they're there to help us with these jobs. And notice that none of these companies add anything of their own. So Spotify doesn't make music, Skyscanner doesn't charter flights, and Tinder doesn't make people. They just make better use of the existing resources, so they do a better job of connecting people with things. And how they do that varies, tends to involve data and algorithms that help to make decisions. Now, we use algorithms to do this, and again, there's so many different examples of this and what they're good for, and I just want to kind of evaluate, because some people are worried about somehow being replaced by the algorithm, or that the algorithm simply can't do as good a job as we could do. And that's not really the case. It's not the case that the algorithm replaces what a person would do. It's more that it kind of supplements that ability, that decision. So we're very good at knowing specifically what we want. But algorithms add value when there's a lot of unknowns that we don't know about. For example, with this kind of Nest algorithmically driven heating system, we know when we're hot and cold, but there might be a particular pattern in our lifestyles that means we're wasting energy in a particular time and a particular time of a week. We're not going to know that. That data is not available to us. So algorithms are good for processing a lot of information and providing us with a sequence of recommendations that help that. So effectively, they are good for finding what Donald Rumsfeld in his famous quote described as the unknown unknowns, the things that we don't know, we don't know. I thought I would bring up this picture of Donald Rumsfeld to remind us of a happier time when the craziest Republican administration we could ever imagine was that of George W. Bush and not the Donald we have now. And it is actually a very good point he made. It was widely lampooned as a piece of kind of Orwellian nonsense when he said it, but he's right. There are things we know that we know. These are known unknowns. And that's the case. If I don't know about this, I need to use that resource to find that. But then there are the unknown unknowns, the things we don't know, we don't know. I need to do a particular thing. I'm starting in a new job. I don't know what it is that I don't know about. And this, again, is where the algorithmic recommendations are relevant and come in. Now, this relates to another point. These are comments made by Elliot Maisy at the recent Learning 2016 conference that he held in Orlando. So he says that we've entered a new epoch in learning, a new period in which we are now confronted with what he calls the learning panorama, and the panorama of kind of learning experiences that are available to us. Now, he thinks our job is now different to what it was. A lot of people at this event, at this conference, are still concerned with building up large libraries of content or kind of, tracking that content or warehousing it in some way. But the reality is that the world of e-learning and online learning already exists. It just had very little to do with any of our efforts. It's happened. It's here. Digital learning is a part of everyone's life. It's just hardly any of us had anything to do with these platforms and technologies that made that happen. And this is this vast library and panorama of different choices that people have available to them. And the learning panorama is not necessarily easy to navigate. It took a lot of willpower to accomplish the job of finding those different resources, and there was a lot of failure and trial and error. And the right resources in a panorama are not always the easiest ones to find. And so when we say that learners are self-directed, we say, absolutely they are. They pursue their own learning. We have to be careful and bear in mind that they may take the easiest route available to them rather than the best route. So a really good example of this is the search. Not only do you need to know what you're searching for, but there's a critical problem with Google, and it's one that's integral to Google's business model, is it brings up 10 results. If you're not on the top 10, forget about it. A vanishing minority of users will ever click page 2. But what if you needed was on page 2? There's no... Google's model is around that top 10, and that's not really enough. If someone needs to solve a particular problem at work and says, "Oh, how do I be a better manager, better people manager? This is my first time doing this," and they put that into Google, what do you want to bet any of the stuff in the top 10 is going to be particularly relevant? So people don't always make good choices, and it means that this learning panorama creates another obligation, a different set of obligation. We're not trying to kind of dictate every possible situation, every possible learning asset that a learner might want to look at, but we are trying to help them make better choices and direct them towards what is going to be useful and what's going to help them. So as he says, with similar problems to that faced by healthcare professionals, people are faced with panorama of food, but how do we get them to make a better choice? To do that, they have to factor in an awful lot of different variables, and again, this is where an algorithm-based approach starts to become more helpful. The learner has multiple different motivations. They have many different reasons for wanting to do something, some of them personal, some of them imposed upon them by the business that they're in, and when you have various kind of competency frameworks to do with their role. There's also lots and lots of different resources. There's an LMS, there's the existing kind of social platforms that might be in place, there's books, there's external resources, there's this whole learning panorama. And this is basically a learning recommendation problem, that we need something that will fill the gap, something that will bridge the divide between I want to learn something, what do I learn, what is the thing that's going to help me? It's a very difficult question to answer. So this is kind of what led us to develop the Globalfilter, and so it is a very robust product, but wish me luck as I attempt to demonstrate to you live. Luckily it doesn't take very long to demonstrate, so it should be okay. We wanted to be able to provide some meaningful recommendations to learners on the basis of just a few kind of indicators. We know that if I've only got 5 minutes to learn something, I probably don't want to spend that 5 minutes putting in lots of search terms to figure out how I get to that, or searching for that information. So we kind of realized that if we just find someone's sector of the economy they work in, their department that they work in, and their level of seniority, we can have a pretty good sense of what might be relevant to that person on the basis of a competency framework. And what this tool does is basically, just from those 3 points, create a deck of assets. So these assets are drawn from, really, the idea is to bring in anything that might be relevant, whether that's external resources, whether those are internal courses that are available already to that learner, or documents, things that might be buried away. And we want to bring all of that stuff together in a very kind of consumable and friendly format. And we can do that by using these kind of, so let's say this particular resource on conflict resolution in the workplace seems relevant to me. We can do that by putting that into a nice kind of product pagey kind of format, which means that we can link to something else but still retain a sense of a unified experience. And the learner has a choice at this point. They can add that to their playlist, they can launch it straight away, and then they're able to rate that, was that useful or not useful, and to provide a kind of takeaway or note to themselves. All of these things, all of these actions are creating useful data for us. We now know that person A who got this recommended thought this was useful enough to launch, to put in their playlist, and also to mark as useful, and therefore we know that that asset makes sense for this particular learner, and it's kind of performed well in that sense. That means that the next learner who's similar is going to get a slightly higher likelihood of being recommended that. And so what we're able to do for an organization is to bridge that gap at scale, in a sense. We're able to take lots of different assets, lots of different motivations, and build an interface that allows us to make those recommendations. This is obviously only a minimal amount of information that the learner has put in, so we might, for example, want to find out how they spend their day, how much time do they spend emailing or spreadsheeting, and therefore use that data to kind of improve that. I'm just going to show one of these things. We might want to look at the learner's goals. What do they want to achieve, and how do they kind of identify what they want to do? So if they say this, for example, want to be ready for promotion, and for example, they say that research, I need to be, much better at it, and I'm not very good at it now, we're then able to remake those recommendations. And so this, in quite a simple way, is obviously now going to push skills to do with research further to the top of the list. So basically, by having this kind of recommendation system, we're able to get that content which we think might be useful to particular users in particular situations. Now, it's at this kind of point that I'm going to stop and see if anyone has any questions. There's not an awful lot of you here, so probably not going to be bursting with questions. But does anyone have any questions about how this learning recommendation engine works? Yeah.
Machine learning or artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So the background to the question was, does it employ any machine learning or artificial intelligence? So the background to Filtered as a company is that we started off by personalizing courses in particular areas. So, for example, in Excel, where there's a lot of content, not everyone has the same needs. And that allowed us to assemble the data to build a matching algorithm that would basically match modules with learners on the basis of their similarity to other learners and what they found useful. And this product effectively extends that algorithmic approach. And so you've kind of hit the nail on the head about why this is relevant and interesting, is that if, for example, we think that a particular competency is mapped against a particular asset, but it turns out that the organization is wrong and actually it's not good at that, this system will learn about the fact that that relationship is not functioning and then map a different asset against that competency. And so in doing so, you're kind of creating this ability to have what is essentially a personalized dialogue with a lot of people at the same time. So this is a case, again, the algorithm, sure, there's still going to be cases. Maybe it's not as good as someone who knows everything about your content library and everything about a learner, but it's a little bit as good as that, and it's possible to do it on a large scale, basically. Any other questions from people? No? Okay. So what I want to kind of come back to is the implications of this kind of strategy and what this means for organizational learning and how we conceptualize the role of this kind of tool. So the way we see it, the role now of a learning and development professional or learning technologies department in this epoch of a learning panorama and all of these opportunities for learning and all of these things happening which we aren't in control of, is to basically accept our role is a bit more like traffic planners than it is like people kind of designing a specific functional space. We know we have thousands of people, and they want to achieve thousands of different things, which means there are millions of potential routes they can get to try and solve that problem. Now, with the traffic planning analogy, you begin to see that, well, not everyone is going to have a good journey. Some people aren't going to find what they want. Some people are going to get stuck in the kind of information equivalent of a traffic jam. So what we need to do as learning designers and as learning departments is basically ensure that the architecture we're providing allows for optimum journeys to be made through that system of knowledge. And that's where the a recommendation system comes into play. A recommendation system is basically the equivalent of a good traffic plan or a good system for managing the direction of travel that people are going. And it means we can point the right people in the right directions and therefore achieve a better impact. I'm going to finish with a few takeaways, but I think that, obviously this product is you can go to the Filtered website and register and try it out straight away. It's free to try for consumers. We obviously want you to think about how it could help your businesses as well. But these are a few different takeaways about you might want to apply more generally. So the first aspect of this is invest in understanding the real requirements that your organization faces in this period of such complexity and work and such diversity of resources available. often what people tell you they need is not what they actually need. And again, the role that data can play is very important here. You ask people what they need in a training needs analysis, and they say, oh, we need PowerPoint, we need leadership, we need this and that, and then they don't actually use that information. It's not really what they wanted, they're just kind of responding to the survey. So when we say real requirements, is looking at actual data and looking at the actual skills gaps that your organisation is going to face and will impede people operationally. The second point is to try to be learner-led, in the sense that much of this information is already available. As we've seen, when we were constructing the prototype of a Globalfilter, we found that the stuff that really worked was a BBC podcast about multitasking, for example, very short bits and pieces, and it was much more about curating that existing material that was about trying to create something new. So if we're learner-led, we can find out what people are using, and surveying people to find out the actual learning they actually do in their spare time for their own reasons is quite useful in that sense. The third one is to actually track data again, so actually to kind of record what people are doing and why they're doing that. And the fourth is to design ways to find those unknown unknowns. So that might be through using social learning platforms, or it might be a managerial process to think about what do people not know they not know, or using an algorithmic approach, as we've demonstrated, in that connecting people with the thing that they don't know they need to know next is probably the most valuable thing you can do. And that's what we need to think about doing, not about basically building a huge catalogue, unleashing learners on it and saying go forth and prosper and find out what you need to do to be a better employee. Our job should be about building a system that's able to find out the thing that's going to impede the learner from being a good productive worker for next day. And to do so, we need to blend automated and human curation. So this is one kind of automated kind of curation tool. There's others that are being developed. We don't lose the human element from doing that. The human element is still very important in terms of selecting particular resources and factoring in human data. But I think it's that blend of automated and personal, curation, which is the key to kind of solving this learning panorama. So that's basically it. I don't have any more slides. Thank you for your time. We're having some drinks at the filtered stand right now, if you'd like to come along to that. And please do try this product. As I say, it's free to try as consumers, and we think it solves a lot of problems. So thank you very much.